Hello and welcome to yet another video for this series. And in today's videos, we'll be talking about subqueries in SQL. What exactly is subquery? One thing we need to know is that a subquery is an inner query, or sometimes we call it a nested query that is embedded inside of another query. So basically, a subquery is a query inside of another query. A subquery is used to retrieve a data that will be used in the original query or for further usage to manipulate any result that is coming up. This tool or this particular aspect of SQL is a very powerful feature in SQL that provide a very good way to perform complex SQL operations and extract queries or results in a dynamic form. In SQL, we have two types of subqueries. We have a, colorated subqueries and non-colorated subqueries. In the colorated subqueries, the inner query solely depends on the outer query for existence. The colorated subqueries are used when you need to retrieve any table or any result that is referencing an information from the outside. While the non-colorated subqueries are queries that are independent of the outer query. So we can evaluate or execute the inner query by itself without depending on the outer query. And also the non-colorated subqueries can return a single result set or a full table or a full result set. The non-colorated subqueries are often used in conditions that when we want to filter out a record to compare values in a dynamic way. Now, what are the advantages of a subqueries? Some of the advantages of a subquery is data isolation. The subqueries will allow us to split our SQL logic in smaller parts so that we can easily manage or digest them. The subquery improved query readability because we are able to read and break down complex SQL queries easily because they are all in different smaller parts. The subqueries are easy. Another advantage is the reusability of the subqueries because we can use different parts of that subqueries in different code and they will still run and bring us the result because they reduce redundancy and they ensure some kind of consistency. The subqueries advantage again is that we can use it for data filtering because it is used. We can easily use it in the where clause to filter a large sum of data to retrieve information. Data comparison is another one. The data comparison, we can use subqueries to compare data from one table with data from another table, helping us in identifying relationships and patterns. The final one that I'm going to talk about in our effort to understand data subqueries is data aggregation and calculation. Subqueries can help us we can use subqueries to perform calculation and aggregations on a set of data which we can further use in the main queries. Without explaining further or explaining much, let's jump into writing some of examples to really understand what a subqueries are. Down here, we're going to start with the non-colorated subqueries, which are queries that are independent. They are not dependent on the outer queries. With that, we want to run a query. We want to run our result, writing a query to retrieve the names of patients who have at least one prescription on file. But again, per the best practice, we always want to indicate the database that we'll be using in our project, which will be the Pollins data tech. So now in answering this question, they want us to retrieve the names of patients who have at least one prescription. So maybe there are some patients in the table that do not have prescription. Maybe there are some patients who we are just who have not gone through any process, so prescription is not on file. But we want to only return those ones that actually do have prescriptions. So in tackling this problem, there are two queries. One of them is to check for the prescription, and one of them is to check for the patient. So what I am going to do, I am going to first of all write a query that will get me the patient first name and last name. But to do that, I have to first of all go into the patient table, dot patient, and run the query to see what I have inside of the patient's table. There are lots of information, but let's not overwhelm ourselves. I will only go for the first name and go for the last name. And when I do that, I can see that there are information about the first name and the last name. But now the question said was to retrieve, we should find out the ones that has at least one prescription on file. So we can come down. So we can come down on this information and now say, okay, so we need to now get the unique prescription from the prescription table. So I can come down here. I'll first of all get information about the prescription, dot prescription. And if I run it, I can see the information that I am looking for. But one thing to pay attention is that I have a patient ID. So if I look at this patient ID, they could be duplicated inside of this prescription. So that means if you see, I have two here, and if I keep scrolling down, I have another two here. So that means I have patients that have um, um, more than one more than one prescription for different reasons. But we only want at least one. So unique, the ones who have just a unique information for the prescription. So I can come down here and get the the unique patient ID for each prescription. So if I come down here and I say distinct, so for example, let me just do the patient ID from that particular table. And when I run it, I can see that I have 69 patients ID, but I don't need 69. I need unique patient ID. So I can come down here and add something called distinct. So if I add distinct to this query and run it, I can find out that from 69 I have gone to 40. So this now is a unique patient ID. But now, how is he related to this guy? How do we get the first name and last name that have at least one prescription in the table? So I can come down here, I'll copy this guy, I'll cut it like it never happened. Then I will come down and I say where I have a patient ID in, remember, we already got something that that returns the unique prescription for the patient ID. So I can come down here and paste that code. So when I do something like this guy that I just paste now is a subquery because it is a query inside of another query. So if I now, what am I saying? This guy, I can run it by itself. That shows that it is a non-correlated subquery because it is not dependent on the outer query. And now I am saying everything that I returned here, I want to find out the patient ID that correspond to one of them. So now if I run the code in this manner, I get these 40 people, and these 40 people are the ones that have a patient, at least one prescription in the table, right? I can also rewrite this code by giving my tables and column name and alias by doing this. And I can come down here, I can say this guy is prescription, and I will call this patient ID prescription dot patient ID. I can now give this table EA for patient, and I can call this first name and last name patient dot and patient dot. So with this, nothing changed. If I run it, I still get the same result, but now the two of them are just giving us different flavor. All right, so far so good. So let's take a look at a subquery that will return at least one record, a scalar. A scalar subqueries is just a subquery that will return one single value. So for example, we want to use that to write a query that will retrieve the name of the provider who has the highest number of appointments. The provider that have the highest number of appointments. There are two pieces to this question. So every providers have gotten appointment, people have come in, people have gone. But which one of all those providers have the highest appointments among all providers? So like I said, there are two pieces to this information. So let's see what we do. If I write my select star to get the provider's information, so it's the select star from DBO dot provider, not prescription, provider. And if I run it to see what I have inside of here, I can see a lot of this. So what I want is the first name. I'll just do, yeah, let's just do the first name and last name. First name and last name. And if I run it, I can see that I have the first name and the last name. But I don't want all of them. I want to get the one that has received the highest number of appointment. So what I would do, I will first of all go into the appointment table by writing select star from dbo.appointments table. And if I run it, I can see the appointments information. But from here, I am now looking for all the appointment information. I have a provider that has given information here. So what I want to do, the highest appointment is what I'm looking for. I can do it in two ways. I can say I am looking for um, the max. If I do the max provider ID, and I can call this max provider ID as max. But I have to call the provider ID. But because this is a scalar, I only need one column. I don't need the whole thing. I don't need two. I only need one column because I am looking for a scalar value, a single value. So with that, I'm only going to call the provider ID. But how am I going to get the actual provider that I need? I'm going to get it from the top one. Top one of what? This top one, I can now say this top one. So let me just write it for. So when I run this guy, I am seeing a top one of this as provider one. That is top one, but that is not what I am looking for. The thing that I am looking for, a provider that has the highest amount of appointment. So with that, I can come down here and do something I call a group by. And what am I grouping by? I'm grouping by the provider ID. And now when I group provider ID, now when I group, oh, provider underscore ID, I'm not sure why it's doing attendance. Now when I do this, I want to order it by. When I order it by, I want to order, I want to order by count of that provider ID in a descending order. Let's take it one at a time. If I run this code without the count, I get 1. But now if I run it with the count of the provider to get what it is, the provider that has provided more is provider ID number 5. So that means 5 is what I want to use and come here and say where the provider ID, I can put 5 here because that is what I need. But this 5 that I put, I did not get it by me guessing. Because as at today, this guy is the highest. Tomorrow it could be somebody else. So putting a hard-coded value defeats the purpose. So the right idea to do is to copy this guy, this 5 that is supposed to be here. I copy it and come and substitute that guy. I'll cut it, not copy, because it's not part of a code. I cut it, substitute that 5 with the subquery that will go in between these two parentheses. And now if I address the code and run it, it tells me that Dr. Mike Clark is the one that has provided, that has gotten the highest number of appointments. So far, so good. So that is how the non-correlated subqueries work, because why? It does not depend on the inner query. We can easily run the query by itself and we get the result. It doesn't depend on anybody at all. But now, the correlated subquery is a different beast. What does it do? The inner query depends on the outer query for existence. With that, let's see what we can solve with that particular question. Do I miss anyone? With that particular question. And the question that we want to look is, can I retrieve a query, write a query to retrieve patients who are taking both ibuprofen and aspirin? So the patient who are either taking ibuprofen and or aspirin. So there are two pieces to this question. The first piece is that we have to get the patients. So let's get the patients first. We say select star from dbo.patients. And if I run it, I can see the patient's information. But what I need is the patient's first name and the patient's last name. If I do that, I can run this. So these are all the patients on file, but we need to only get the ones that are taking aspirin and ibuprofen. So with that, we have to first of all get the information about the aspirin and ibuprofen. And that aspirin and ibuprofen, they are prescription or medication. So it is a prescribed information. So we go into the prescription table, select star from dbo.prescription table. And when we run it, we can see some kind of information. The medication name, we have the aspirin, we have the ibuprofen. So we want to know this first name and this last name, which one of them takes either this or this. That is our goal. So to do that, we need to isolate the information first. And right here, we can see a patient ID. So we can come down here and call patient ID. And in this patient ID, we are not looking for everything. We are only looking for where the medication name is in open and close the parentheses. Remember for our second video when we filter things, and I'm looking for either ibuprofen or aspirin. So I can come down here, put this one here, comma, and do the next one. Put this one here and comma. Now, if I run this guy, I can see that these are 6 patient IDs that takes this medication. But who are they? We have no idea. So we need to find their first name and their last name. So to do that, we'll first of all give this guy an alias of PR, then call this guy PR dot. We'll do the same for this one. Say this one is PR dot. Now we need to now find a way for these numbers to extract this name for we to know who are the people taking this medication. So to do that, I can come down here. I say where. I'll first of all give this guy an alias. I'll call this guy PAT, and I can call the PAT dot and PAT dot. Still nothing changed. If I run it, it's still going to be the same. I just give an alias to that particular table. But now in this situation, we need to find a way to put this guy that they will be merged together. So we can come down here and say, what I am looking for is where the PAT, which is the patient ID from my patient table. So patient ID from my patient table is in the information that I gathered from the prescription table. So now, this is how we convert it to become something different. So at this point now, we can now say, okay, if we run this code now, we can see those patients that are using those patients that are using either ibuprofen or aspirin. So let's move on to the last query that will get us to our question answered. And this query is write a subquery in a select statement. A subquery in a select statement. Yes, a subquery can appear in a select statement without any issue. So this is where we will be seeing the correlated subquery in action. So we want to write a query to retrieve a list of providers and the number of prescription that they have written. List of providers and the number of prescription that they have written. So to do that, if I come down here, I can write a select star to get the provider's information first. Provider's information is dvo.provider. And if I run it, I get this provider information. But what I need to get now is their first name and their last name. So I have gotten the first name and the last name of the provider, no problem. Now, the number of prescription that they have written so far, I want to go into the prescription table from dbo.prescription. And if I go into the prescription table, I can see that there is a I can count the number of prescription that is in each of these tables. So I can come down here and I say count star for all the prescription in the table. And if I run this guy now, I can see that I get the number of prescription from the prescription table. But now we need to be creative. We need to make this guy depend on this guy for us to select everything that we need. So we're going to make this guy a select statement. So I'm going to cut this code and put a comma here and open and close a parenthesis. And inside of that, I will paste this code. Let me dress it so that it is easy to understand. And here I will give this guy an alias called prescription. Now, I will leave it first. Let me just leave it and don't worry about it. Now, I will give the provider an alias called pro for provider. Now, when I do this, I want this guy to cover some kind of connection with this guy. And for me to do that, I will come in here and I say where the prescription dot provider ID equals the pro dot provider ID. And now when I do this and run the code, I can see that I have the number of prescription that each provider have written. And I can come down at the end and I give this guy an alias. I might say, let's say number, maybe number of prescription, right? So what did I do here? I wrote to get the count, but I tie the provider from the outer query to the provider to the inner query. And now to show and prove the non-correlated subquery is that I cannot run this code by itself. When I do, it says the multi-part for PRO is not recognized. And that is how easy we can write subqueries to do a lot of things, to dissect complex query, because now it is easy for us to read the query and run through it. And this is the end of the video for subqueries. I appreciate your time. I ask you to leave me a comment if you have any questions or need a little bit time to explain this. I can still do that. And also don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Leave me subscribe to the channel, click on the notification button so that as more videos are coming, you will be getting it. Our next video will be a case statement, how we use case in SQL. It's going to be a fun video. I ask you to stick around and I'll see you very soon. Thank you and God bless.